What's your perspective on Clase's run?
I think he's going to have a shot at the Cy Young.
Who would you vote for American League Cy Young Award if that were voted on today?
Emmanuel Clase.
Through this amount of time, he's the best pitcher ever.
Hold on. In the history of the sport?
He's better than Mariano.
Runner goes. This one is gonna fly! Here he comes. And it is up and out! Home run to Kerry Carpenter. Giancarlo Stanton! A home run!
How did this happen? According to, well, everyone, Emmanuel Clase just had one of the best relief seasons in modern history. He allowed only 5 earned runs in 74 1/3 innings. Since Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947, only 2 relievers who have thrown at least 50 innings have finished with lower ERAs than Clase this year. He earned the save in 47 out of 50 chances this year. He was the clear lead option in a dominant Guardians bullpen. Clase was voted an American League Cy Young finalist, the first reliever to finish top 3 in voting since K-Rod set the saves record in 2008. Clase's regular season totals are plotted here. This is what he did in the postseason. Clase allowed 3 homers in the postseason after allowing just 2 in the prior 6 months. He allowed more earned runs in 7 postseason appearances than in 74 regular season games. Again, I ask, how does this happen? This video is a total examination of how we should evaluate relievers, reliever usage in the playoffs, and reliever volatility as a whole. Clase is our primary case study. To understand why his postseason was so shocking, we have to examine what came before. Ask the fans, the journalists, and the players, and Clase is the consensus pick for best reliever in MLB. And that's justified, but I think most people feel that way because of his ERA. And that's my issue. In terms of evaluating a relief pitcher's ability, ERA does not matter. Saves do not matter. Save rate does not matter. If I were building a bullpen, I wouldn't even put these stats on the spreadsheet. And I hope this video convinces you too to stop using these stats to evaluate relievers. Before I dive into the data, and trust me, I did, back to Clase. His story doesn't begin in 2024. Emmanuel Clase joined the Guardians before 2020 as part of the Corey Kluber trade. Clase had struggled as a starter in the Padres system, so when the Rangers brought him in, they moved him to the bullpen. He relied on the 2-pitch mix that he still uses today, power cutters and power sliders. His 100-mile-per-hour cutter was and still is his signature pitch. After he was suspended for PEDs in 2020, he finished 5th in Rookie of the Year voting in 2021, becoming Cleveland's closer that summer. He's been the best reliever in MLB since 2021, but it hasn't all been smooth sailing. 2023 was a step back for Clase from his first 2 seasons in Cleveland. His strikeout rate dropped 7 points, his walk rate was up, he generated fewer chases and harder contact, and he only stranded 60% of runners that he allowed on base. All of that culminated in a 3.22 ERA and a league-leading 12 blown saves. Like I already said, I don't think either of these stats are important. Here's one that is. Strikeout minus walk rate. Strikeouts are good, walks are bad, and the pitcher has control over each. For now, all you need to know that a strikeout minus walk rate over 20% is generally very good. The best strikeout relievers exceed 30%. A handful of the best relief seasons of the 21st century have eclipsed 40%, as well as Jacob deGrom in 2021. Here's Clase's strikeout minus walk rate by season in Cleveland. Clase is not a strikeout pitcher the same way someone like Aroldis Chapman is. Clase generates a lot of weak contact to get outs, much more in the vein of Mariano Rivera than the dominant 4-seam fastball throwers of today's game. But even then, a drop-off like this is concerning. My diagnosis is that slightly overlapping pitch movement profiles led to more balls in play, as well as more solid contact. But Clase also got very unlucky. His left on base rate that year was 60%, meaning 40% of runners he allowed on base came around to score. A 60% left on base rate is incredibly low, especially for someone who's still very good at limiting damage contact. Most importantly, left on base rate is not stable year over year. Show me a left on base rate leaderboard and I'll show you very good and very bad relievers at both the top and the bottom. Of course, better pitchers should strand runners more efficiently, but over single relief seasons, that stabilization doesn't happen. Clase simply got unlucky. His allowed average on balls in play was also a career high by far. Worse batted ball metrics help explain some of it. Even then, his BABIP rising this much is probably the result of some bad luck. As a result, his ERA went up nearly 2 full runs and he blew a league-leading 12 saves. Just looking at ERA, he went from the 5th best reliever in 2022 to 63rd best in 2023. I don't think he was as good as he was in 2022. In fact, I think 2022 is clearly his best season and 2023 is clearly his worst. But do I think he was this much worse? Absolutely not. So what changed for him in 2024? Clase threw his cutter slightly more like a four-seamer, which tracks with my hypothesis that his pitches looked too similar in 2023. He regained about an inch of IVB separation between his slider and his cutter. Now I'm not sure if this is correlation or causation. Regardless of the cause, Clase went from 63rd best ERA in 2023 to a Cy Young finalist in 2024. But then, everything went wrong. Baseball is a funny game. The optimal way to evaluate players and build rosters is by looking at how they perform over a 162 game season. In October, all of that gets thrown out the window. Adrenaline is up, usage is different. Poor sequencing or execution in one high leverage plate appearance can completely flip a series. Clase had one single multi-inning appearance in the 2024 regular season. He never once entered a game in the middle of an inning. In the postseason, Clase entered 4 different times with runners on in the 8th inning. He only entered 3 times with a clean inning. It's hard to quantify how these circumstances affect a pitcher. Retired MLB reliever and current YouTuber Trevor May made a video a few weeks ago about how the Guardians burned out their bullpen. His magic number for reliever appearances is 70. May looked at Hunter Gaddis, Cade Smith, and Tim Herron as examples of Guardians pitchers who pitched over 70 times in the regular season, then regressed in the playoffs. May's focus was on analyzing their four-seamers, so Clase wasn't part of the video. But as it turns out, Clase was probably affected the most. After getting 3 outs across 2 innings, Clase threw a cutter right down the middle to Jake Rogers, who smoked a base hit through the hole. Trey Sweeney got around on a well-located cutter and put it into the gap for another base hit. It all fell apart against Kerry Carpenter. Clase was grunting with every pitch, clearly fatigued, just trying to get across the finish line. Clase fell behind 2-0, got a strike with a cutter, then threw 3 straight sliders. He rarely ever throws his slider to lefties. The first was frankly a lucky miss. The second ended up down the middle, and Carpenter just missed it. The third was his second flattest slider of the year, breaking less than an inch horizontally. It was also 94 miles per hour with 8 inches of induced vertical break. This was essentially a shitty cutter right down the middle, 5 miles per hour slower than usual. Carpenter has never hit another ball over 110 miles per hour in his career. Clase has never allowed another batted ball over 110 miles per hour. Fatigue led to Clase putting 2 runners on, then falling behind in this count, altering his sequencing, and executing poorly on the biggest pitch of the game. This was the perfect storm. He allowed another run in his next appearance. Similarly, he came into a high leverage spot in the 8th, got the job done, then got into trouble in the 9th. But the leadoff double coming around to score a run was inconsequential, as the Guardians had a 2-run lead. Clase nailed down the 2-inning save in Game 5 without allowing a base runner, sending Cleveland to the championship series. The struggles were forgotten for a couple of days. Against the Yankees in the ALCS, things got ugly. Mr. October himself, Aaron Judge, smoked a cutter the opposite way to tie Game 3. Then Giancarlo Stanton crushed a slider to center to take the lead. These were Clase's first 2 batters of the series. Carpenter's homer didn't feel like a fluke anymore. Later that night, Clase took to Instagram to remind everyone who he was. Take a look at the awards and the accolades. He's still one of MLB's best relievers, easily the best reliever of the 2020s. The next day, Clase got shelled again, allowing 5 base runners and another 2 runs. Here's the pitch location of every Yankees hit against Clase in the championship series. The Yankees, lefties and righties, hunted one zone, and hit Clase hard every time he attacked that zone. Clase attacked this part of the plate more than anywhere else all year. Here's how he went after the Yankees in his following appearance. When he could locate his cutter on the arm side edge of the plate, the Yankees couldn't touch him. The Yankees' advanced scouting did an excellent job at cutting the plate in half, and it took Clase 3 games to adjust. Too little, too late. Fatigue, microscopic scouting, and better lineups will exploit even the smallest flaws of every pitcher. He was used differently than he'd been used all year. Out of 74 regular season appearances, Clase only threw at least 15 pitches 24 times, or about a third of his games. He did that in 5 straight games in October, including throwing 20 pitches 3 times and throwing a season-high 28 pitches in an outing. His highest usage of the year and his highest leverage appearances came after a 6-month regular season where he appeared in nearly half of his team's games. I don't think Clase is some choker who can't handle the spotlight. He was fatigued. He's still human. Great relievers are massive assets come October, but burning them out long-term or short-term will eventually lead to blow-up innings. Here's the thing. I also don't think Clase had some once-in-a-lifetime season. He earned his reliever of the year. He was elite, don't get me wrong. But when you dig deeper than ERA, it clearly wasn't even his own best season. He's phenomenal, but he was never infallible. This is a ranking of the top 30 relievers in MLB in 2024. Hold your angry comments until I explain myself. Clase ranks 3rd, just behind Griffin Jax and Mason Miller. How did I come to this conclusion? Well, I didn't hand select this order. This is the ranking of a new stat I've created. I call it Relief Pitcher Composite, or RPC. Clase ranked 3rd in 2024, 4th in 2023, and 2nd in each of 2022 and 2021. Nobody who outranked him in any given year did so more than once. The stat begins in 2021, and 3 of Clase's seasons rank in the top 10 since then. Therefore, Clase is the best reliever of the decade by far, and he's probably still the best in MLB, despite my reservations about ERA overvaluing him. This one-number stat is significantly better than ERA, and it's also much more holistic than any of the ERA alternatives. This section is a full explanation of the data that goes into RPC, as well as why I think it mitigates the biggest flaws with ERA. I've mentioned about a half dozen times now that ERA doesn't work when analyzing relievers. It's about time I back that up with data. I'm not a stats teacher, but I'll try to explain my statistical analysis as well as possible. I ran a study to measure how much a reliever's ERA tells us about his ERA in the following season. The coefficient of determination, or R-squared, is as close to gospel as you can get with this type of statistical analysis. This one number, in layman's terms, represents how much impact one set of data has on another. It's at the core of the methodology behind RPC. You don't need to be familiar with statistical jargon. Just know that the R-squared is always a number between 0 and 1. Let's say the R-squared was 0.5. That means the x-axis dataset explains 50% of the variance of the y-axis. We want to find an R-squared as close to 1 as possible in this case, and an R-squared near 0 should be disregarded. I used the 1007 relief seasons since 2015, where the pitcher threw at least 30 innings in both that season and then the following season. Clase's 2021 season, for example, includes his 2021 ERA under the Year 1 ERA column, and then his 2022 season ERA under the Year 2 ERA column. The same applies for the other 1006 seasons analyzed. So we have 1007 Year 1 and Year 2 ERAs. Here's how they look on a scatter plot, with Year 1 on the x-axis and Year 2 on the y-axis. The R-squared between the datasets is 0.002. This means that less than 1% of the pitcher's Year 2 ERA is explained by the Year 1 ERA. You'd think that there'd be some type of correlation, but when you really think about it, how many relievers maintain a similar level of ERA year over year? Even with Clase, who we've established is the best reliever of the decade, his ERA has jumped dramatically year to year more frequently than it's replicated itself. It's nearly impossible to estimate a Year 2 ERA with just a Year 1 ERA, so I tried different Year 1 data to see if I could find something that could. I ran the same experiment with different Year 1 statistics: FIP, XFIP, Sierra, and strikeout minus walk rate. These year 1 stats do explain year 2 ERA better than year 1 ERA, but the correlation is still very weak. Sierra has the strongest R squared, but it's just 3.3%. ERA isn't just a bad stat to input, it's also a bad output. It's noisy, especially for relievers. One bad outing can massively skew a reliever's ERA. Different sequencing on the same events, team defense, or just plain luck can make a reliever's ERA look a lot better or worse than their actual level of play. 3 important, high-variance stats have large impacts on ERA: left on base rate, average on balls in play, and home run per fly ball rate. To get an idea of how much these stats explain ERA, I took the R squared of each with same year ERA. As you can see, they each correlate somewhat significantly. No other stat that I measured impacted ERA more than left on base rate. Over 50% of the variance of ERA is explained by this stat. That wouldn't be an issue if left on base rate was something that pitchers control. As I've already mentioned, there is skill involved in stranding runners, but even the greatest ever, Mariano Rivera, has 20 points of variance between his prime seasons. Left on base rate has near zero correlation year over year. The stat that impacts current season ERA the strongest doesn't hold year over year at all, which explains why reliever ERA doesn't hold year over year. And it's the same story for these next 2 stats as well. Batting average on balls in play, or BABIP, is definitely reliant on a pitcher's style. Someone who gets a lot of strikeouts is less impacted by BABIP, and someone who gets more fly balls will have a lower BABIP than a ground ball pitcher. But again, the variance is important and not always controllable, and it's heavily impacted by the team's defense. Rivera's BABIP dropped over 100 points from 2007 to 2008, and it's not because he suddenly got a lot better at age 38. It has a 24% R squared with a year 1 ERA, but just like the left on base rate, zero correlation with itself year over year. Same story with home run per fly ball rate, somewhat malleable over the course of a career, but high variance season to season. Mariano was one of the best at keeping the ball in the park and generating weak pop flies. He allowed just 6.5% of his induced fly balls to leave the yard in his career, but in 2009, that was 15.2%. Again, he didn't suddenly pitch nearly 3 times worse in that regard. He was simply unlucky. Another example is Edwin Diaz. Over a quarter of the fly balls he allowed in 2019 left the yard. Even in a juiced ball year, that's an absurd rate. 2 seasons later, his homer per fly ball rate was just over 5%. He did generate weaker contact in 2021, but he threw pretty much the exact same pitches as always. He didn't forget how to pitch in 2019, it was just one of the unluckiest relief seasons in modern history. Homer per fly ball rate explains 19% of year 1 ERA variance, but once again, 0% of year 2 homer per fly ball rate variance. RPC doesn't include ERA at all, and it minimizes the 3 high variance stats as much as possible. So what exactly goes into RPC? Fielding independent pitching is an ERA estimator that just takes ratios of homers, strikeouts, walks, and hit by pitches per inning, and then normalizes them against the league average. Thus, homer per fly ball rate still has a massive impact on the stat. Pitchers who generate a lot of weak contact are punished by the stat because it treats every ball in play as equal by ignoring every ball in play. That being said, it's still more useful than ERA. Expected FIP erases the problem with homer per fly ball dependency by replacing the home run component with the league average homer per fly ball rate times the pitcher's fly ball rate. FIP paints 2019 Edwin Diaz as a very bad pitcher. Just by removing the homer per fly ball component, xFIP says that Diaz was above average. It does tend to undervalue pitchers who consistently generate weak contact. A guy like Mariano, who undershot the league average homer per fly ball rate for his entire career, outperformed his xFIP significantly. Sierra does a better job at quantifying batted ball data than the others. For example, it understands that high fly ball rate pitchers tend to allow fewer homers per fly ball, so it doesn't treat homer per fly ball rate as 100% random. It's a very complicated formula, and I'm not going to dive deep into it here, but it's about the same quality overall as xFIP in terms of sustainability. As I mentioned earlier, I really like strikeout minus walk rate as a baseline for examining pitchers. Strikeouts and walks are nearly fully controlled by the pitcher, so pitchers who strike out a lot of batters without walking many tend to be more reliable. It correlates stronger year over year with itself than anything else I've talked about, but it can't be the only thing we look at since it strips away all batted ball data. Clase ranks 9th, 17th, and 19th in FIP, xFIP, and SIERA out of relievers with 30 innings in 2024. He also ranks 44th in strikeout minus walk rate this year, which is above average, but that doesn't do him justice as the elite reliever that he is. While I think ERA overvalued him, there's no way that he didn't have a top 10 relief season. As much as ERA is overvaluing him, these stats are undervaluing him. So here are some stats that do quantify his balls in play. Ground ball rate is simple. It's the proportion of batted balls hit into the ground. Ground balls in general have better outcomes for the pitcher than line drives and fly balls, so higher ground ball rates are good. Clase's career rate is 60%, and his 57% rate in 2024 ranked 17th out of relievers. Average exit velocity is how hard each batted ball is hit, on average. This is also self-explanatory. Weaker contact is good, hard contact is bad. Clase's average exit velo was 86.5 miles per hour in 2024, which ranked in the top 10% of pitchers. Stuff Plus and Location Plus don't measure quality of contact, but both stats give an idea of how hard it is to hit against the pitcher. They are components of Fangraph's Pitching Plus pitch modeling formula. Stuff Plus measures how nasty pitches are, and it's based on pitch movement, velocity, release point, and a few other factors. Location Plus only measures where the pitch ends up and what type of pitch it is. These stats are very consistent even in small sample sizes year over year, and they're being used more and more to evaluate pitchers across MLB. If you're still here at this point, then this type of stuff will interest you, so I highly encourage you read up on these two stats after this video. Clase ranked 3rd in Stuff Plus and 18th in Location Plus this year. I like all 8 of these stats, but ranking pitchers with any one of them exposes shortcomings in each. Tyler Holton ranked 243rd in Stuff Plus. Clase graded outside of the top 10 in SIERA and xFIP. Mason Miller has a subpar ground ball rate. RPC achieves a balance that no other single stat has right now. Here's how I made it. I compiled a list of every relief season over 30 innings pitched since 2020. Using that data, I standardized the 8 useful stats I just covered. Standardizing the data puts it all on the same scale, grading each reliever between roughly -5 and 5 on each stat every season. Then, I gave each stat a multiplier. Here's each stat's multiplier and a ratio of their value. These multipliers aren't exactly scientific. I gave higher multipliers to the lower variance stats that I feel best explain pitcher ability. Essentially, it's my personal opinion of each stat informed by how consistent each stat is. After the multipliers are applied, each pitcher's standardized and weighted stats are added up to one number. I adjusted the formula for volume, giving each reliever a slight boost for each inning over 65 and a slight punishment for each inning under 65 in a season. I also adjusted it so that 0 is the league average RPC each year. Anyone with a positive RPC is a good reliever. Anyone in the negative is a below average reliever. Because Stuff Plus is such a big chunk of the stat, I built in a failsafe. Some pitchers, such as Holton, are very successful despite poor Stuff Plus grades. So if a pitcher has below average Stuff Plus, their Stuff Plus multiplier is divided by the sum of all of their other grades, provided that that sum is above 1. If that sum is above 1, then they're probably a good enough pitcher without the Stuff Plus formula liking their pitches, so the Stuff Plus negativity is mitigated. This brings Holton's RPC from 174th in MLB to 73rd in MLB, which seems more accurate to me. Based on the 4 years of data we have, the R-squared of this metric is much higher year over year than any other ERA estimator. It has a similar year over year correlation to strikeout minus walk rate, while being a much more robust stat. Let's take a look at the 2024 RPC rankings. This stat isn't perfect, so leave a comment below if you disagree with the rankings or any of my methodology. There are definitely issues with the formula. It is still probably biased towards strikeout pitchers, but I think it does a good enough job at analyzing the best weak contact generators. Clay Holmes, for example, ranks 13th, which is a lot higher than most people would probably rank him. Now that he's moving to a starting role with the Mets, his 2025 won't prove RPC right or wrong in any regard, but I definitely think his 2024 was super unlucky. He had a very similar year to Clase in 2023. His ERA and league-leading 13 blown saves paint the picture of a bad closer, but he also allowed a .391 average on balls hit under 70 miles per hour. I could go into an entire 5 or 10 minute tangent about his season, but since he's going to be starting next year, I don't think it's worth it. Instead, here are a few other relievers I found intriguing while looking at this data. AJ Puk might be the most surprising name in the top 10, but he was excellent after joining the Diamondbacks at the deadline this year. Puk ranks 18th in the stat in 2023 and 39th in 2022. It may overvalue him a bit, but I think RPC has more accurately placed him in the past than anything else, so I have incredibly high expectations for him in 2025. Michael Kopech's RPC was 38 this year. That puts him at 26th in MLB. When he was traded to the Dodgers at the deadline, his ERA was near 5, and his peripherals weren't especially great in isolation. But thanks to his Stuff Plus and Location Plus grades, even before the trade, Kopech's RPC would have graded out well above league average. He was a big-time reliever for the Dodgers in their World Series run, and I expect him to get even better this year working in the Dodgers lab. The last name I want to mention is Robert Garcia. I think he might be the most underrated reliever in baseball. He's had an unbelievably low left-on base rate during both of his MLB seasons, but his strikeout to walk rate is great, and he generates a ton of weak contact with his 3/4 arm slot. He was the 5th highest RPC riser from 2023 to 2024, and I expect that trend to continue. Look out for him to break out as a really good closer in 2025. Before I let you go, let's finish things off where they began. Clase is ranked as the 3rd best reliever in 2024, behind Mason Miller and Griffin Jax, which I think is reasonable. He's definitely top 5, which none of the ERA estimators believe. But in terms of preference, I'd be open to hearing arguments for both Jax and Miller. Regardless of how you personally feel, those 3 guys are in a league of their own, clearly the most elite tier of relievers. Clase will likely be elite again in 2025, though I doubt he replicates a sub-1 ERA, even if he pitches at the same level. With his insane usage these last 3 years, I'm staying cautious. Hopefully Stephen Vogt and the Guardians have realized that they can't rely on him and their bullpen to carry them this way forever. I'd hate to see a guy lose that 100-mile-per-hour cutter to injury, because it's truly one of a kind. Special thanks to my channel members, Misty, Zach, and Adam. While I couldn't get this video out to you early, I've got another surprise. I've released the spreadsheet for this video to my members only. It's a bit of a mess, but if you want to take a look at the guts of this video and all of the RPC rankings since 2021, hit that join button below for just $4 a month. I'll probably tweak my methodology a bit in the future to make it more scientific, hopefully to the point that it becomes a legitimate tool to analyze reliever performance. And if you've made it all the way to the end of this geek fest, please subscribe. I think I've earned it for keeping your eyeballs for this long. Thanks for watching.